If it's Monday, Vice President Harris and President Biden are about to hold their first joint campaign event since Biden dropped out of the race as Democrats blitz the battlegrounds for Labor Day in a push to win over working-class voters. Plus, President Biden and Vice President Harris discussed the fate of a potential hostage deal from the Situation Room as protests rage in Israel after 6 more hostages are killed by Hamas in Gaza, including an American citizen. And Germany's far right wins its first regional election since the Nazi era, delivering a major blow to Chancellor Olaf Scholz, while signaling a potential resurgence of anti-immigrant nationalist politics in Germany and beyond. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamiche Alcindor in Washington. Happy Labor Day. People across the country are honoring American workers and marking the close of the summer. Of course, this is also an election year, which means this is also the traditional kickoff to the final campaign sprint. Later this hour, President Biden and Vice President Harris will appear together in Battleground, Pennsylvania for their first joint campaign appearance since Harris moved to the top of the ticket. They're hitting the campaign trail together after a meeting in the Situation Room this morning about the next steps in the Israel-Hamas war. That meeting came after Hamas murdered 6 hostages, including American Hirsch Goldberg Poland. We'll have much more on that coming up. Meanwhile, today's focus for the Democratic ticket, the Rust Belt battlegrounds. Harris, Walz, and Biden traveled to Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania as the Trump campaign ramps up its online attacks on Harris. In Detroit, Harris hit Trump's record on labor at an event with union leaders.
Donald Trump blocked overtime benefits from millions of workers. Tyrese talked a bit about this and opposed efforts to raise the minimum wage. He appointed union busters to the National Labor Relations Board, and he supported so-called right-to-work laws. And if we know how they play, we know what they do. So let's not pay too much attention to the polls. Let's know, like labor always does, we are out here running like we are the underdog in this race because we know what we are fighting for.
This comes as the Harris campaign released its latest assessment of the race, calling themselves, quote, the clear underdogs, despite having a narrow lead in new polls, a massive war chest, and a battleground operation that it says dwarfs their rivals. Meanwhile, new polling from ABC News shows Harris potentially building more momentum. She's leading Trump among likely voters by 6 points, which is just outside the polls' margin of error. Joining me now from Pittsburgh is NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, where we're expecting to see the president and Vice President Harris together later this hour. And Maura Barrett is in Detroit, where Vice President Harris spoke earlier today. So, Mike, I want to start with you. Both President Biden and Vice President Harris are in Pittsburgh later this hour. What can we expect from them, especially, of course, on this Labor Day campaign appearance?
Well, Yamiche, on the substance, we can expect to hear more from Vice President Harris, similar to what Maura heard earlier today in Detroit, with that compare and contrast message, talking about the role of the Biden administration that she is a part of in supporting workers compared to what we have seen in the Trump administration and what they will cast as an anti-worker sentiment. There's going to be a specific pitch to Western Pennsylvania and to steel workers in particular when the vice president makes her stance known on an important issue here, which is the potential purchase of U.S. steel by a Japanese-owned company. The vice president expected to say that this is an American company that should remain in American hands and that she will always have the back of America's steel workers. This is going to be making sure this coalition of voters that are so important for Democrats, she shares that same position with President Biden, who made the exact same point in the exact same city just a few months ago, Yamiche.
It's really important that you point that out, that she's sort of making the same point that President Biden did, because President Biden has often styled himself as the most pro-labor president in history. I wonder, can Vice President Harris really meaningfully make that argument to union leaders and union voters in the same way, especially as you pointed out today, but also in our group chat earlier today, you were talking about the fact that what she wants to do is also what President Biden has wanted to do.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what's so interesting about the role of union voters in this election is when you think about all the constituency groups that we have seen a surge in support for Harris that had not necessarily been there for President Biden. One of those coalitions that had been most rock solid for the president was, of course, union voters. He considers this his base of political support. And a lot of the union leaders that were standing behind the vice president will also be here with her in Pittsburgh. The question is, where were the rank and file workers going to be? And that's why having the president appear here with her today for the first time as something of a validator to say, you've always brung me to the dance, I've always had your back, so will this vice president. That's such a critical role that we're going to see the president be able to play, and for her to set the table for her. And we know the ways in which she has learned some of the way Biden practices politics and built on that as well. So it's going to be a fascinating moment, Yamiche, to see these two share a stage together for the first time in a campaign capacity since he ended his candidacy.
It is certainly going to be a fascinating event to watch. Now, you talked about, of course, the role that President Biden is playing here. They're in Pennsylvania. Do you think that the Harris campaign feels like that's the state where he's best used? Do we think that maybe he's going to be used other places? Talk a bit about their thinking on that front.
Yeah, well, at Pittsburgh, it's no accident that this is where President Biden is making his campaign debut as the super volunteer, as he called himself, because Pittsburgh has always been something of a political home base for President Biden. He was here in 2008 as Obama's running mate, his first solo appearance. He came back the following year as vice president, came back in 2015 when he was thinking of running for president in 2016, and then he came back in 2016 with Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton's vice presidential pick. He set up his 2020 candidacy also by, guess what, marching in the Pittsburgh Labor Day parade. So this is an example of where the Harris campaign thinks President Biden can continue to be valuable. It's also going to be in some of those other blue wall states, Michigan and Wisconsin, where we're also going to see President Biden appear later this week. That is where we see a significant block of union votes and also of older voters. Those are two constituencies where Biden had also been outperforming the Democratic Party and where they think he'll be useful for Harris this fall.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be looking for your reporting there as the continued Biden whisperer. So thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks.
Now, Maura, of course, you are there in Michigan. The vice president began this Labor Day blitz in Detroit earlier today. What did we hear from her?
Well, Yamiche, Vice President Kamala Harris is really looking to harness on to President Biden's strength when it comes to union voters, known as Union Joe, right? And so what we heard from her this afternoon, she was met with a really excited, invigorated crowd, and she really focused on the comparison between collective organizing for unions and how that symbolizes unity, because when you work together, that's how you can get the most power. And so she kind of towed the line between the work that unions do, how they make wins for themselves, and how that can mean that they could work together for the Harris-Walz ticket. And so she really focused on a lot of the key issues that we heard from voters talk about with us in line, who said that they wanted to hear about new policies and what Harris would do for them. She focused on talking about parental leave, paid sick leave, vacation time, the idea of the opportunity, the economy of opportunity, as she put it, talking about how everyone deserves the right to build generational wealth, be able to buy a home, look forward to the future of their families. And so that really hit a point for folks in the crowd. Really excited to see her here. And she also made that point that you talked about earlier about how she feels like, she's saying she feels like an underdog in this race, and how for the next 64 days she's going to be doing the work on that campaign trail and needs other people to support her, especially with the all-important union vote. I think another point that was interesting to notice, several union leaders, union presidents of various unions standing on the stage just behind her, so kind of showing this very visual signal of support. But it's important to note that a lot of the times these leaders will endorse and support a candidate while the members feel differently. And so that's that line. That's the votes that she's working to win right now, Yamiche.
It's really an important point you make, because I've definitely been in places where the union leaders are saying we should definitely back Democrats, even President Biden, and the rank and file are saying something different. I also want to, though, of course, ask you about her running mate. That, of course, is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. He's staying in the Midwest. So where has the governor focused his campaigning this weekend?
So this weekend, Governor Walz made a homecoming trip. He went back to Minnesota for the Minnesota State Fair. He typically, as governor, would go every single day of all 10 to 12 days of the fair, but he went just for a short visit on Sunday to make sure he got that in. And it was a bigger situation of fanfare than he typically was welcomed with. And then after that, this morning, he met with labor leaders to celebrate and the labor leaders in St. Paul, Minnesota, before he went up to Wisconsin, where he's speaking at the Labor Fest there. I think he just wrapped up in the last couple of minutes or so. And he's really working to remind people of his middle class background and the fact that he's a former union member himself as a former educator. And so something like funding public schools and providing accessible colleges and the path for that really is something that he's super familiar with. And so that's what he was expected to talk about today. Again, he just wrapped up, so I missed most of his remarks as I was coming on to you. But he will also be hitting the trail later this week, heading to Pennsylvania to continue the campaigning.
Yeah, and we should note that those were live pictures that we saw of the governor. So thank you so much, Mar, for your reporting. And as we said today, former President Donald Trump is off the campaign trail as his campaign and allies continue to defend the campaign's posting of a video on TikTok highlighting the former president's visit to Arlington National Cemetery last week. That comes despite federal law prohibiting campaign-related activities at Arlington. Trump's defenders are pointing to his invitation by Gold Star families who lost children in the 2021 Kabul airport attack as justification for the video. This weekend, Vice President Harris weighed in on the controversy for the very first time. She said in a lengthy post on X, which of course used to be Twitter, she wrote, quote, "The former president disrespected sacred ground all for the sake of a political stunt." Trump replied to that tweet with a series of videos of the family members of 7 service members killed in that attack, criticizing Harris. And on Sunday, on Meet the Press, Senator Tom Cotton emphasized the families wanted the former president there.
Senator, is it ever appropriate to make campaign content at military grave sites?
He didn't take campaign photos there. These families, Gold Star families, whose children died because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's incompetence, invited him to the cemetery, and they asked him to take those photos because, as they told me yesterday when I spoke to Kelly Barnett and Darren Hoover, the parents of Taylor Hoover, who has Arkansas ties, they don't get to go to the beach on Labor Day. They don't get to have barbecues. This is their one chance to have a memory of their children, to commemorate their service and to honor their sacrifice. They wanted President Trump there. They wanted to take those photos.
Now, Senator Cotton also accused President Biden and Vice President Harris of ignoring their own invitation by those family members, though the White House and a Harris aide tell NBC News no such invitation was received. With all that being said, joining me now for more on this is NBC News' Vaughn Hilliard. So, Vaughn, thanks for joining us on this Labor Day. Trump seems to be happy to defend himself when it comes to these sort of pushes and the idea that there are people that are criticizing his visit to Arlington Cemetery. So talk a bit about how they're handling all this.
Right. I think that we could agree, Yamiche, that a lot of nuance often gets lost in political moments and back and forths like this. Of course, this started largely with the National Arlington Cemetery official who came forward anonymously and through the Army made clear that she was pushed by a Trump campaign aide who was there, in part helping take some of this video and photos here. And ultimately that led to the post that you just saw from Kamala Harris, calling it disrespectful to the sacred ground to which Donald Trump visited last week. Now, of course, part of this is for the Trump campaign. It's calling attention to why he was there in the first place. And those testimonials that were played by some of those Gold Star family members who thanks Donald Trump for being there and recognizing their sons and daughters who were lost. There were 13 Americans who lost their lives 3 years ago at Abbey Gate during the Afghanistan withdrawal. Again, though, I think it's important, Yamiche, when we're talking about the context of all of this, the Afghanistan withdrawal was 20 years in the making, and in part due to the Doha agreement that was struck between the Taliban and the Trump administration in February of 2020. It led to more than 5,000 Taliban prisoners being released. And of course, under intense scrutiny, Donald Trump was considering having a full withdrawal by the time he left the White House himself. Ultimately, it was left to the Biden administration, who oversaw, and unexpectedly, the Taliban moved in great force to take over and ultimately killed 13 Americans. And so this, for both campaigns, I think is uncomfortable largely because of the extent to which there are family members who are at the heart of this back and forth.
As you talk about both campaigns being uncomfortable, is this something that will resonate with voters? This also, of course, comes after J.D. Vance has questioned and attacked multiple times Governor Walz's National Guard service.
Right. Veterans and their family members make up no small part of the American electorate. And when you look at the critiques of Governor Walz's record as part of the National Guard, of course, J.D. Vance was a veteran himself of the Marine Corps, served one tour in Iraq. And when you look at particularly a lot of the criticism that has been directed at Donald Trump over the years, including from two of his own former Pentagon defense secretaries, James Mattis, who noted upon leaving the White House in 2020 that he had seen no president in his lifetime who had no interest in unifying the country. And Mark Esper, Secretary Esper, also upon leaving the White House, called Donald Trump an unprincipled man who is only interested in his own self-interest. And so this is where you see the criticism going from Donald Trump to Kamala Harris in her limited role so far in the administration, and ultimately the extent to which she has as being the number two, her ability to serve in any capacity close to commander-in-chief, to also the criticisms not only from Kamala Harris and her campaign, but those who had previously served in top military capacities alongside Donald Trump during his first term.
Yeah, a lot to digest there. And meanwhile, as all this is happening, Donald Trump is not on the campaign trail today, but we did hear from him this weekend in an interview with Fox News. So I wonder what stood out to you, Vaughn.
Right. Actually, I think we have a bite of this, and it has to do directly with the superseding indictment of the federal election interference case, that if Donald Trump were to get in the White House, may never even see the light of day if he were to order his Department of Justice to drop that indictment against him for the alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. I want to let you listen to one specific part of his remarks last night. Take a listen.
It's such a bad precedent because people are going to think about it differently. They're going to think about it differently, and it's very sad, actually. But you know the good news? It's so crazy that my poll numbers go up. Whoever heard you get indicted for interfering with a presidential election where you have every right to do it? You get indicted and your poll numbers go up. When people get indicted, your poll numbers go down.
So if you're special counsel Jack Smith in the prosecutor's office, you hear Donald Trump explicitly saying that he interfered in the 2020 election. And yet, if you're Donald Trump's defense team, you also hear him contending that he had the right to interfere in the election in his role as president. And of course, we have heard Donald Trump for 4 years now repeatedly say that there is cheating and that the election was stolen and rigged, of course, which there is no evidence of such claims. Yet what you are looking at is questions of whether this ever goes to trial. On Thursday, Judge Chutkan in D.C. is going to have an initial hearing to hear the potential calendar that this trial could play out. Of course, Jack Smith's office, the prosecution, the government would like to see this take place in a more speedy way before including the election, not necessarily the trial, but to hear some of these motions to dismiss that Donald Trump has brought. And Donald Trump's team, his legal team, has suggested that this should not be heard. Any of the motions to dismiss should not even be heard until after Inauguration Day. So a lot is on the line, not just politically for Donald Trump, but also legally, Amish.
Yeah, definitely a lot is on the line and a lot to watch there. So thank you so much, Vaughn.
Thanks, my friend.
And coming up, a defiant Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu holds his first press conference since 6 more hostages were killed in Gaza. Now he faces mounting pressure from President Biden and Israeli protesters to pause the fighting and bring the remaining hostages home. Plus, what's next in Germany after this weekend's state elections delivered the far right its biggest electoral victory since World War II. You're watching Meet the Press now. Is the scene tonight in Jerusalem, where Israelis are once again taking to the streets to express their grief and anger. Hundreds of thousands demonstrated this weekend, demanding a ceasefire after the bodies of 6 hostages were recovered from Gaza, including American Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. The Israeli military said the hostages were executed by Hamas as Israeli troops were closing in. Today, Hirsch's parents, who have campaigned tirelessly for their son's release, spoke at his funeral.
For 330 days, Mama and I sought the proverbial stone that we could turn over to save you. Maybe, just maybe, your death is the stone, the fuel that will bring home the remaining 101 hostages.
If there was something we could have done to save you and we didn't think of it, I beg your forgiveness. We tried so very hard, so deeply and desperately. I'm sorry. Nell, my Hirsch, I ask for your help as we transform our hope into grief.
Late this afternoon, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will not agree to a truce if it means a complete withdrawal from Gaza. He also expressed his condolences to the family who lost loved ones.
I said to the families, and I reiterate this evening, I am asking for your forgiveness that we did not manage to bring them back still alive. We were close, but we didn't achieve it. Israel will not stand silently doing nothing facing this massacre. Hamas will pay a very heavy price.
Ahead of a meeting earlier today with the U.S. hostage negotiation team in the White House Situation Room, President Biden criticized Netanyahu for not doing more to end this conflict. NBC News international correspondent Sanchez joins me now from Tel Aviv. So, Raf, thanks for being here. Netanyahu, of course, is facing mounting pressure to accept the terms of a ceasefire deal. Is there any indication he'll give into that pressure?
There is not, Yamish. And one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's superpowers politically is that he is able to withstand enormous amounts of pressure from American presidents, from liberal Israelis. And judging by his press conference earlier, this is not a man who is planning to back down. As you said, he expressed for the first time since the bodies of those 6 hostages were recovered on Saturday some contrition. He said that he had asked their families for forgiveness over the failure to bring them back alive, but he did not concede that that is a sign that his policy is failing. And if anything, he doubled down. You can see at that press conference, he's standing in front of a large map of Gaza. He is literally giving a lecture to the Israeli public and to the world. And he is explaining that as far as he is concerned, Israeli forces will remain on the Egypt-Gaza border. He says that that is critical for stopping weapons flowing in from Egypt into Gaza. But Yamish, that is also one of the absolutely key stumbling blocks in these negotiations. It is something that is not only unacceptable to Hamas, but it's also unacceptable to Egypt. And even Israel's own defense minister, the man in charge of the security of this country, has said it is worth making concessions on this question of the Egypt-Gaza border in order to bring the hostages home. The prime minister also said he didn't believe that President Biden had made those comments that he did. He said that he hadn't seen them. He wasn't going to take a reporter's word for it. So no indication at this stage that either the pressure on the streets or the pressure coming from the White House is going to lead to a change in policy. Yamish.
Well, as you just said, you noted that this corridor, this border is incredibly important. Talk about sort of what this border is for people who don't really understand it, and also explain why it's so significant.
So it's referred to by the Israeli military as the Philadelphia corridor. It's about 10 miles wide. You can see it on your screen there. And it is basically the border in between Egypt and Gaza. And before the war, you had Egyptian forces in charge on one side of the border, and you had Hamas in charge on the other. And there is that major border crossing, the Rafah crossing, through which so much of the humanitarian aid flowed in the first part of this war. Now, Israeli forces seized control of the corridor in early May, and they say since then they have discovered dozens and dozens of tunnels that go underneath the border, and they say it is through those tunnels that Hamas has brought in the weapons, brought in the rocket components, brought in the money that it uses to power its war machine. And so Israel is saying if they are going to succeed in their goal of defeating Hamas, they need to choke off those tunnels, and that means Israeli forces need to stay on that corridor. It's worth saying the United States has suggested there are alternatives to the presence of Israeli forces on that corridor that could still guarantee Israeli security. Just to give you an example, those tunnels could be shut down on the Egyptian side rather than the Gaza side, and the U.S. says it is looking at all possible solutions to try to find a way forward through this impasse. Yamish.
Yeah, and as you bring up the sort of role and the views of the United States, I want to ask you, the President Biden says the U.S. may present its final deal for a hostage exchange this week. Is there any concern, though, that approach, sort of having maybe even a red line there, that could backfire?
Yeah, it's a high-stakes strategy in some ways, Yamiche, and I will say this is fundamentally a Middle Eastern negotiation, and at this point there are some questions about American credibility, about whether the U.S. is really willing to walk away from the table. You might remember Secretary of State Antony Blinken was here in the region a couple of weeks ago, and he said at that point that this may be the last best chance to get a deal. And yet here we are a couple of weeks later, the Biden administration saying, well, the next time may be the last chance. So I think at this point, it does not seem that either Israel or Hamas believes that the United States really will walk away from the table indefinitely. But clearly, frustration is mounting in the White House as this drags on and on and on, and a ceasefire deal remains just out of grasp. Yamiche.
Yeah, certainly a lot of frustration and definitely a lot of heartbreak as this stops and starts. So thank you so much, Raf. And we're also keeping an eye on the situation in Germany, where a far-right political party has won a state election for the first time since the Nazi era. The far-right anti-immigration party, dubbed Alternative for Germany, or AfD, finished first in the German state of Thuringia. AfD also won 30% of the vote in a German state called Saxony. The results are a stunning rebuke of Germany's center-left coalition led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz. That coalition, however, does appear to be holding together for now. NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Letterman joins me now. So, Josh, this is, I think the headline here can worry some people. What led to the far-right party's victories here?
Yeah, so none of this is going to sound particularly unfamiliar to you, Yamiche, because it is the same playbook that we have seen used by far-right parties across Europe and, frankly, even by former President Trump's campaign in the U.S. It is a strongly populist message, anti-incumbent, throw the bums out kind of campaign message, and it has played significantly on fears about migration, particularly Muslim immigrants coming to Germany, and according to the AfD, this far-right party, taking people's jobs. They are complaining about high cost of living, high rates of inflation, as well as voicing a lot of opposition to Germany continuing to provide financial support to Ukraine. And so it is kind of a message of Germany first, really, saying that at least this part of Germany in the east, the formerly communist parts, feel that they have been left behind by Germany's current government, Yamiche.
Yeah, and as you bring up Germany's current government, I have to, of course, ask about Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Is he in jeopardy at all of losing his actual job?
So not immediately, because these were state elections that don't necessarily affect the national system. But there are elections that are coming up next year, and there are real questions about whether Olaf Scholz can even hang on until then. He has said he wants to run again to be chancellor next year. But there are some concerns that given just how badly his own Social Democrats party was routed in this election, that some of their coalition partners might start to say this looks like, a lame duck kind of a situation that could potentially bail on them. So not a guaranteed situation that he is going to lose power, but it certainly is looking worse for him today than it was about 24 hours ago.
Well, definitely a situation to keep an eye on. Thank you so much, Josh Letterman. And up next, running interference. New reporting on how Republicans are preparing for a potential Trump loss this November and why Democrats are sounding the alarm. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we get closer to Election Day, Democrats are raising concerns about Republican efforts to potentially sow doubts about the election results if former President Donald Trump loses. In Georgia, Democrats are suing to hold new election rules put in place by Republicans. Those new rules would empower local officials to delay or potentially block the certification of election results. In Michigan, Republicans are suing over whether the city of Detroit hired enough Republican poll workers. And in North Carolina, Republicans are suing the state election board, alleging it's not doing enough to prevent non-citizens from voting. Harris campaign official, speaking on the condition of anonymity, told NBC News, quote, "We believe that every case they filed is a brick in the foundation of an argument they will make in November that the election is rigged." In a statement, the RNC said, quote, "While Democrats continue their election interference against President Trump and the American people, our operation is confronting their schemes and preparing for November. We should note there is no evidence of any kind of Democratic scheming to rig the election." Joining me now on set is my NBC News colleague, Peter Nicholas, who is just tracking all of this for us. So, Peter, Democrats are sounding the alarm here. Republicans seem like they're sort of gearing up for what they think might be an election that they're considering to be stolen or rigged. They're going to claim that. They claimed it last time. It wasn't true. What do you know more about these efforts and really the battles that people are fighting already?
Well, you mentioned some of the lawsuits, and what Democrats see is a pattern here. And the pattern is what's connecting all these lawsuits is an argument that Republicans can make in the event that Donald Trump loses, and that's that the election was rigged. That was something happened that's untoward and raises doubts about a Kamala Harris victory. So this could potentially gin up Donald Trump's supporters. There could be more protests. Democrats fear there could also be more violence, akin to what we saw on January 6th. So this is very serious, and it's also serious for another reason, too. There are poll shows there are grave doubts among the parties about whether our elections are fair, whether our democracy is working or it's broken. Republicans tend to be very skeptical about validity of these elections. So all these arguments about this process is flawed or this isn't working or that's broken in this state or this battleground can't tally the results properly, all that feeds these suspicions. And that's not a good thing for a healthy democracy.
And you break down not only what Democrats are sort of sounding the alarm about, but also how they're preparing for it. So tell us a bit about that reporting.
Well, Democrats say they've been preparing for more than 4 years, really. And they have literally hundreds of lawyers. They have in-house lawyers. They have lawyers in battleground states. They've got lawyers who have pre-written briefs in anticipation of arguments Republicans might make. So, for example, you mentioned Georgia, where state election board wants to empower local election boards, county officials, to decide on their own whether the election was valid, to conduct their own reasonable inquiry, which could slow things down. Democrats had pre-prepared briefs that they filed, so they're on top of this, and they're trying to see if they can nullify this and get a court to establish that certifying election results is mandatory. It is not discretionary.
Yeah, and as you bring up Georgia and you bring up your reporting, one of the quotes stuck out to me. You had an expert that said most of these local officials are supposed to do 1 + 1 = 2, yes, not 1 + 1 = maybe bamboo in the ballots. Peter, of course, just the kind of quote that you would put in a great story. I wonder what you make of that and sort of what that means, that these local officials could be empowered to do that.
Well, that's exactly the problem, Yamiche, which is that our local officials really qualified to decide whether, the ballots are proper, whether the elections were held in conformance with regulations. All they're supposed to do, a local election board, is to say, this candidate got X votes, this other candidate got Y votes, and that's it. And so, we had another quote in the story from a Democratic official who was saying they just don't have the qualifications, the background, the investigative skills to conduct this kind of inquiry.
Yeah. I also want to ask you, how involved is former President Donald Trump directly in these efforts?
Well, what we know is Republican National Committee, in some cases, is filing some of these suits in coordination with, and some other local Republican groups are also involved. In some cases, individual Republicans are filing the suits. So, it just seems that we have Republican officials at the local or national level who have been involved, and Democrats are countering. The Harris campaign is working in some cases with local Democratic, state Democratic groups, and also with the Democratic National Committee.
Yeah. Well, definitely a situation that you are keeping on top of, and we're going to continue to be watching for your reporting, because this is, of course, going to be a very big deal now, but also, of course, in November. So thanks so much,
If
Peter.
we find bamboo on any ballots, Yamiche, I will tell you. We will report that.
Thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate that. And after the break, new polling on the widening gender gap in the Trump-Harris race and why it matters, with just 64 days until Election Day. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, Labor Day marks the start of the home stretch of the presidential campaign. And it comes as new polling shows a potentially widening gender gap. A new ABC News Ipsos poll taken after the Democratic convention has Vice President Harris up 13 points among women. Meanwhile, Trump leads by 5 points among men. That's an 18-point gender gap. Joining me now on set is my NBC News colleague, Ali Vitale. Also with me is Savante Myrick, former Democratic mayor of Ithaca, New York, and president and CEO of People for the American Way, and also Mark Short, former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence and an NBC News contributor. So I want to first start with you, Ali, because you, of course, wrote a book on women being elected. So what do you make of this 18-point gender gap?
It's huge. And typically the thing that struck me is that gender gaps are typically driven over the years by men becoming more conservative. White women reliably, and people were surprised at this for some reason in 2016 and 2020 when they saw the ways that President Trump was able to earn the majority of white women. Some people were like, wait, what? Hillary's on the ballot? No, that's not the way that this works. But what strikes me in this new polling is that we're watching the gender gap change because white women might be shifting the way that they are thinking about voting. It's really early, but when we think about the role that women in the suburbs specifically could play again, we watched them build part of the key coalition for President Biden in 2020. And now President Trump has to either figure out how to talk to these people, which I really don't think he's going to be able to do, given the way that their issue set is around democracy, small d, and then, of course, abortion and reproductive access, or he risks losing them. And the Harris team is aware that they need them, and they are more than happy to welcome them with open arms.
I wonder if I could stick with you for a minute to just talk about the way that Vice President Harris is talking about this. She's a history-making candidate, and I keep thinking about the fact that her mom told her, and she talked about this at her speech, show them who you are, don't let them tell you who you are. She's showing people I'm a history-making candidate, talking about her family, but she's not talking about it directly in the way that, say, a Hillary Clinton did.
We show up how we show up. Right? It's true in every single job that you could have. Everyone knows that Vice President Kamala Harris is historic. I think the way that they're not talking about it is really important because it almost speaks to a thing that might not be a motivator for either reluctant Republicans who might not be too enthused with Trump, but still want to see that there's an alternative. Mark knows this so well. Identity politics on the right, it's a bad word. You don't talk about it. And so if you're trying to appeal to those kinds of voters, simply not saying the thing might be enough to just say, hey, listen, I'm not here to talk about that I'm qualified, that I'm here as a woman, I'm here as a person of color. No, I'm qualified. I want to do this job. Here's what I want to do with it. And that's the focus, clearly.
Yeah. And Mark, according to the pollster, white women have actually moved closer to Harris since the convention, while white men are moving closer to Donald Trump at that same time. How far do you think former President Trump can go by only winning that demographic?
I don't think you can. I think you have to win over the female vote. And I think that, in 2016, Hillary Clinton was a history-making candidate as well, but she clearly had a personality that wasn't as appealing to many female voters. I think that the challenge for the Trump campaign is that I think there's an opportunity to win over those voters if you're talking about economic issues, if you're talking about Kamala Harris's economic plan, if you're talking about safety in your communities. But unfortunately, I think this campaign's been run so much on personality attacks that's probably less appealing to suburban women voters.
Yeah. And I want to ask you, when you think about the idea that this is still a close race, but the Harris campaign with the money and with the organization, they're still calling themselves the underdog campaign. Do you think they really believe that? Or do you think that this is sort of messaging to get their base, Democrats who might be feeling really good, still motivated and not feeling like they got this?
I actually do believe that the Harris campaign is an underdog. Men are 47-0 in presidential elections, and it's not because we deserve it, just to be honest.
Amen.
Right? There is a strain of misogyny in our country that is real. Besides that, of course, she's running against a world-famous billionaire who has been president before, who survived an assassination attempt and has an enormous money-making machine behind him, right? We all know Donald Trump, but if you strip away that name, if you just say that, a world-famous billionaire is your opponent who's been president before, yeah, you just might be the underdog. And you add on top of that, of course, the rank unfairness of the Electoral College, the fact that people's votes don't count the same. right? In America, everybody's vote should have the same weight. It doesn't. And the Electoral College means that if Democrats are going to win, they probably have to win the popular vote by 3 to 4%, right? So unless she's up by 6% in the polls, she might be behind or tied. It is smart to recognize that Democrats still, in this election, despite all the energy, the charisma, and the professionalism of the person at the top of the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris, we are still the underdogs.
Yeah. When you put it that way, it makes sense if you think about it, if you take the name out and say he was the president and is a billionaire. That being said, Ali, I want to play for you some of Kristen, of course, the moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen's exchange with Senator Tom Cotton on the issue of federally funding IVF. Let's take a listen.
Just very quickly, do you know where this money would come from to cover IVF? Because in 2022, some $8 billion were paid by.
Well, no, again, that's why I say we'd have to evaluate any specific legislation.
So you wouldn't
as I do
support
on any specific.
dollars.
I'd have to evaluate any specific legislation as I would on any legislation.
So you're still undecided on where you stand on this government-funded IVF plan.
Well, I certainly support couples having access to IVF, and it's not even a controversial issue in any of the 50 states.
It was definitely a controversial issue in Alabama, but setting that aside, I wonder, are Republicans where most Republicans, Ali, where Tom Cotton is when it comes to liking IVF but not knowing whether or not they want to federally fund it?
First of all, you can always just say Kristen. She's like the Madonna or Cher of politics, especially at this table. But we were actually having this conversation outside, the idea of where Republicans are on IVF and how this issue has changed over the decades. And what I was pointing to outside is this idea that in Alabama, when they revived this idea of an embryo, which is so central to the IVF conversation because it's literally how you are storing these fetuses, it's a question of conception. It's a question of where the Republican Party is on that. It's still a live issue, frankly, when you talk to a lot of these other Republican lawmakers. So yes, I do believe that Republicans by and large support IVF as a way to expand your family, but like the technical mechanism of it, I still think is unsettled within the party.
Mark, what do you make of this idea of federally funding IVF?
I think it's one more example of how lost our party is today on financial issues. We have a top candidate who said he's not going to touch entitlement spending. We have $35 trillion in debt. Our presidential nominee says he's going to put a cap on drug prices. Now we're going to pay for IVF funding. I mean, you can't out-Democrats. I mean, they're the ones that want to use taxpayer dollars to fund everything. And somehow if we're trying to compete with that, that's a losing strategy. We're not offering an alternative, Yamiche.
What about there was all this back and forth about sort of where Trump stands on abortion, especially the measure in Florida. Are you feeling a degree of whiplash here?
I think there's been enormous whiplash. I mean, I think that he's separated from the people in the administration who actually were pro-life. He's reverted back to his traditional pro-abortion positions. And I think there's been a consistent step back, whether or not that's, basically saying I'm for chemical abortions, or not that's saying it's up to the states. If you're basically saying you're okay with abortions in California and New York, and you're okay with chemical abortions, the number of lives you're actually trying to protect is actually a very small percentage. And so the president has walked away from those pro-life positions.
How do you see this issue?
Well, I truly believe, probably for the first time in my adult life, that it's very easy to be a Democrat right now. That we are actually the more organized, professional political party. Republicans were famous for being in array while we were in disarray. But now it turns out that there is something wonderfully useful about a coalition that comes up with a platform together and holds that platform together through rules, through legislation, and through process. So that when the emperor has no clothes, right, when President Biden is clearly a bit too aged to serve another 4 years, the party can do something about it. President Trump has transformed the Republican Party into a cult of personality, including the Republican platform, which just said that they passed at the RNC, just said, whatever Trump says, we like. So now activists have worked their whole life to pass a federal prohibition on abortion are now being forced to support a candidate that doesn't want that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We could talk about this for a while, but thank you so much to all of you. And still to come, roughly 10,000 hotel workers walk off the job this Labor Day weekend. What's next for negotiations? That's after the break. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As people across the country celebrate Labor Day today with barbecues and pool parties, NBC's Zingle Asamoah has more on the history of this federal holiday. Take a look.
Today, work looks a lot different.
How would you describe the workplace now versus, say, what it was like a few decades ago?
A buyer's market versus a seller's market.
Johnny Taylor is president and CEO of the Society of Human Resources Management.
Back in the day, employers, if you will, bought talent. And so it was very much up to the employer to determine the terms and conditions of employment. Fast forward, in a knowledge-based economy, everyone now understands that they sell their talents and their skills to organizations.
The seller, in this case, the American worker, is celebrated on Labor Day. Put simply,
Labor Day, in some ways, for many decades, was closely tied to labor unions in the United States, right? Especially up to the 1950s, 60s.
At the time, union membership was defined by craft unions or guilds. Think skilled workers, carpenters, plumbers, and electricians.
It's very much not connected to labor unions anymore, which have declined in membership, really since the 1970s. That image of the guy in a sort of steel-toed boots and a hard hat, mostly that doesn't exist.
Today, just over 11% of American workers are in unions, down from a high of over 30% in the 1950s. So how did we all end up getting the day off? Quick history lesson.
Labor Day officially became a national holiday in 1894 in legislation signed by then President Grover Cleveland. Now, there's some dispute over which labor leader first proposed the idea to kind of strike one day a year. And then some state governments over the course of the 1880s started recognizing this as Labor Day.
But the way we work has drastically changed. According to Pew Research Center, today, 14% of employees are fully remote. That's compared to 5.7% who worked from home in 2019 prior to the COVID pandemic. And the length of time spent in careers is changing too. Workers under 34 years old are on average switching careers every 1.3 years. That's compared to older employees switching every 4.9 years.
Why have we seen these changes?
Number one would be demographics. American birth rate's been on a decline.
Translation, fewer workers and more demand.
The second and perhaps most important reason is just the nature of business in a knowledge-based economy.
And then there was COVID. The nation reached a 20-year high quit rate following the pandemic.
The organizations who are going to win are the ones who get the right people and keep those people, keep them motivated. And so employers have to be far more focused now on how we treat our employees.
Our thanks to Zinkley for that reporting. Meanwhile, thousands of hotel workers walked off the job on this Labor Day weekend after contract negotiations with some of the country's biggest hotel chains stalled. NBC News' Antonia Hilton is following it all from Greenwich, Connecticut. So, Antonia, how long will this strike last?
Hey, Yamish. Well, this strike right here in Greenwich, Connecticut is likely going to last at least one more day. But really, it's part of potential rolling strikes that could spread to other cities very soon, and as in a matter of just a couple days. What these workers are asking for are higher wages, better health care, and better work schedules and opportunities. Some of the people here have worked for the Hyatt chain, where I am in Greenwich, Connecticut, for 10, 25, 30 years. Some of them saying that their raises in recent years have only looked like 25, 30 cents on the dollar. And they are struggling to pay their rent and pay their basic bills at the end of the month. And so that's the fundamental concern here. And they're hoping that the pressure on this Labor Day is going to bring these major hotels back to the table so they can get a new contract done, Yamish.
Well, as you talk about the hotels possibly coming back to the table, is there any sign that this strike is yielding any progress toward the workers' goals here?
Well, I can tell you, I spoke to a travel expert who told me that he thinks it's very likely that coming out of this holiday weekend, that these brands are going to be feeling some of that pressure to raise the wages at least and to take a look at new contracts for these workers. And that's because this is just one holiday. We have a bunch of other ones coming just a few weeks, coming up in November, then in December. And those brands, they can't really afford to not have their full staff, their cooks, the housekeepers working at these hotels as people start to travel at the busy end-of-year season, Yamish.
Yeah, and I just wonder, as you stand there, are you feeling the sort of energy of these workers? What's your feeling on just sort of how they're feeling?
Absolutely. There's a lot of energy here. We've been here the last 2 days. People laugh. At times they have even cried to us, talking talking about what their lives are like. Just to give you a snapshot, I spoke with one worker who has been with the Hyatt for 25 years. His most recent raise a few years ago was only 30 cents. And he has kids. He's struggling to pay for their colleges. He's struggling to pay his bills. And that's what it's like here.
Yeah. Antonio Hilton, thank you so much for bringing us that news straight from, of course, that picket line there. And I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press. Now, the news continues right now with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.